Number 8. Waterlogged Battle Tank. The T-72 tank was designed over 50 years ago, but continues to serve as the backbone of the Russian army. More than 18,000 of them were produced during the Soviet era, and an estimated 2,000 of the T-72 and its variants are in service today. Thousands more remain in storage. The tank made its debut in 1973 during a mission to overwhelm NATO forces in Germany. Since then, dozens of variants have been deployed. The most recent version of the tank, the T-72B3M, has been in service since 2014. It has seen combat in Syria and is currently being used in the ongoing war in Ukraine. A little over a month into the conflict, images circulated of a T-72B3M tank sinking in Ukraine's Sumy region near the Russian border. In several photos, Russian soldiers can be seen clinging desperately to the vehicle as it descends beneath the water's surface. Another image shows the tank completely overturned and submerged, the crew reportedly drowned. The sinking happened toward the end of the Battle of Sumy, which began in late February of 2022. Russian forces nearly captured the city, but Ukrainian troops mobilized and fought back. Over the following weeks, the battle turned in favor of the Ukrainians. The violence continued until early April, when Ukrainian officials confirmed that the last of the Russian troops had begun to clear out. Number 7. Lark Vs. Beachgoers on the Jersey Shore were perplexed when two massive amphibious military vehicles appeared on the Ocean County coast in 2022. They soon learned that the machines encountered mechanical issues while traveling from New York City to Virginia. John Henage and his sister, who both work in the marine construction industry, bought the rare Vietnam-era vehicles from a previous owner in Staten Island and were en route to the Chesapeake Bay when they lost two engines. The three-story tall machines were identified as a type of lighter amphibious resupply cargo vehicle known as the Lark LX. Weighing in at 200,000 tons, it's the largest amphibious vehicle ever built by the U.S. military. The Lark LX was designed for transporting tanks and soldiers and has a carrying capacity of 100 tons of cargo, or around 200 people. On land, each wheel was powered by a 265-horsepower diesel engine. In the water, the four engines worked in pairs to drive the vehicle's two propellers. Given its enormous size, the Lark LX has a top speed of 20 miles per hour on land and just 7.5 miles per hour in the water. The first Lark LX crafts were produced in 1952. The vehicle first saw combat in 1967 in South Vietnam, and the military retired the last of its Larks in 2001. Only 950 were ever made, and there are only a handful of functional examples left in the world. The two that Henage bought had sat neglected for around 15 years before being brought back to life. He paid $25,000 each for the vehicles, which were far too big to be shipped by conventional means. The only way to get them to Virginia was to drive them down, which ended up being a 2.5-week journey. Henage named the Larks Wild Sally and Big Jack and is working to restore them to their former glory so he can put them to use. Number 6. A Humvee in Eastern Europe. In the days leading up to the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, there was a massive buildup of Russian military vehicles and troops around the country's borders. There were many different types of vehicles, yet one stood out against the rest: an American-made high-mobility multi-purpose wheeled vehicle, also known as a Humvee. Its presence was immediately noticed because the Russian military doesn't typically use Humvees. The vehicle contained features of a Humvee variant that the Ukrainian military uses. Naturally, the question that arose was why it was in Russian territory. Its location also left people wondering what military force was using it and sparked fears that a Russian invasion was imminent. By the time the images of the Humvee surfaced on February 23rd, people had already started posting photos of Russian convoys heading toward the Ukraine border. The next day, Russia invaded the country, and the convoys kept coming in the following days, with one line of vehicles measuring 40 miles long. While questions about the Humvee's origins were never officially answered, it's probably safe to assume that it was seized from Ukrainian forces by the Russians. Number 5. Curtiss P-40 Kitty Hawk. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk was the third most produced American fighter of World War II. Over 13,700 of the iconic aircraft were built between its introduction in the late 1930s and when production ceased in 1944. Many of them didn't survive the war. One of the most mystifying losses came in June of 1942, when British Royal Air Force Flight Sergeant Dennis Copping was tasked with flying a damaged Kitty Hawk to an airfield in Egypt for repairs. It wasn't expected to be a long flight since Copping was coming from another RAF base in Egypt, but he never arrived at his destination, and for the next 70 years, the fate of the aircraft and its pilot remained a mystery. Answers finally came in 2012, when an oil worker stumbled upon the wreck in the Sahara Desert. Historians were astonished by the aircraft's remarkably preserved state, describing it as the aviation equivalent of Tutankhamun's tomb. The plane's guns and ammo were still on board, where they had most likely remained untouched since the plane crashed. Bullets in the Kitty Hawk's spine suggest that Copping may have made an emergency landing after being shot at, but the aircraft was already damaged before it took flight, which may have had something to do with why it crashed. Copping's remains were conspicuously absent from the wreck, indicated that he attempted to reach safety on foot. A month after the P-40 was found, historians found human remains roughly 3 miles from the crash site, along with a parachute fragment, a metal button with the year 1939 engraved on it, and a keychain bearing the number 61. The fallen airman's family pushed for the bones to be tested to confirm whether they were Copping's remains, but they got mixed responses from the Egyptian Ministry of Defense, which claimed that no DNA could be extracted from the bones due to their age. In the same statement, the agency stated that the DNA in the bones confirmed that they all belonged to the same person. This obviously makes no sense, but efforts to clarify the matter left many questions unanswered, and the location of the bones is a mystery. What do you make of this case? Tell us in the comments below and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 4. MRAPs. Starting in 2007, the US military began producing a type of light tactical vehicle called the MRAP. It's the same name that was used for the program it was developed under, known as the Mine-Resistant Ambush Protected Program. The vehicle was designed in response to the increased threat of explosive devices, or IEDs, during the Iraq War. Production ended in 2012 amid criticism about the program's expensive $50 billion price tag and several other issues. MRAPs were expensive to operate and siphoned funding from other programs, delaying the development of vehicles that the armed forces needed. The military also admittedly didn't know what to do with all its surplus MRAPs following its withdrawal from Iraq. Some of them were given to law enforcement agencies throughout the US as part of a government-sponsored program to get rid of military surplus. In 2014, the Bergen County Sheriff's Office in New Jersey ordered 2 of the vehicles under the program. It proved to be a controversial move, with many questioning why the department felt it needed a vehicle designed to withstand roadside bombs. Then Sheriff Michael Saudino defended the decision, citing the MRAPs used by law enforcement in Los Angeles and other places where its armor proved to be life-saving during shootouts with criminals armed with assault weapons. But he put the order on hold when the program he planned to buy the vehicles through underwent a state and federal review. His attempt to acquire MRAPs came right after the Middletown Police Department in Monmouth County got one of the vehicles, which was free, courtesy of the federal government, minus the cost of shipping. Number 3. Lake Shasta Mystery Boat. When a severe drought caused water levels at Northern California's Lake Shasta to recede in 2021, history enthusiast James Dunson took the opportunity to search for a World War II-era boat that was rumored to be submerged in shallow waters. After hiking along the shoreline for miles, he finally spotted the 36-foot vessel. Dunston told the New York Times that the boat was incredibly well preserved, still bearing its original paint, and it had its ramp down as if it sank during a beach landing. Known as a Higgins boat, it's one of around 23,000 vehicles of its kind that carried soldiers and fighting vehicles from ships to beaches during Allied amphibious attacks. The boat's ramp number confirms that it was assigned to the Navy attack transport ship, the USS Monrovia. Despite its small size, it saw a lot of action during World War II. It carried American troops into battle during the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943, then traveled to the South Pacific and participated in the Battle of Tarawa in the Japanese-held Gilbert Islands, known today as Kiribati. The vessel sank during the battle and was salvaged afterwards, but how it ultimately ended up in Lake Shasta is a complete mystery. Gerald Meyer, who works as the executive director of the Nebraska National Guard Museum, told The Times that he believes someone out there has the answer and that it's simply a matter of finding the person. Number 2. A World War II museum in the desert. The low humidity, high temperatures, infrequent rainfall, and remoteness of the desert provide the perfect conditions for preserving vehicles. And while time will inevitably take a toll on a vehicle no matter what type of environment it's kept in, the Libyan desert is filled with World War II-era machines that are shockingly intact for their age. The vehicles were left behind by British, American, German, and Italian forces over 70 years ago. Some of them have seen better days, including the American-made M4 Sherman tank that's been looted for scrap metal. Others bear minimal damage and look almost as if someone could get in them and drive them away. In the Calancho Sand Sea region, there's a collection of Italian tank turrets that have just a thin coat of surface rust, including M13, M14, and M15 models. There's also an American M3 Stuart light tank that's missing some parts, but it's in exceptional condition otherwise. Included among the British vehicles is a collection of Daimler armored cars, which look like they were parked and abandoned after being damaged in battle. The twisted remnants of a heavily damaged Bristol Blenheim bomber aircraft serve as a reminder of the brutality that World War II soldiers experienced in an environment that's known for being eerily calm and quiet today. During the conflict, the Libyan desert served as the main battleground in the North African campaign, which began in June of 1940 and lasted nearly 3 years. The leftover relics that are still visible today seem both out of place and like a step back in time. And at number 1, a Douglas B-18 bomber. The Douglas B-18 Bolo was a heavy bomber that served in the late 1930s and early 1940s under the U.S. Army Air Corps and the Royal Canadian Air Force. After just a handful of years in service, it became obsolete and was retired in favor of more advanced bombers that could fly longer distances and carry heavier loads. By then, the U.S. military had already lost many of its B-18s in the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The remaining planes were deemed incapable of going on bombing missions and were reassigned to other duties and used in training exercises. In early 1942, German U-boats were mercilessly sinking American merchant ships along the New England coast. During their return flight from conducting anti-submarine patrol in the region one day, a B-18 crew encountered blinding snow squalls and heavy winds that blew the plane 150 miles off course. The pilots were used to flying the B-24 bombers and were inexperienced with the B-18, which presumably only added to their confusion. They mistakenly believed they were over the Atlantic Ocean, and when the clouds broke to reveal the city below, the crew thought it was in Providence, Rhode Island, but it was actually in Concord, New Hampshire, and unbeknownst to the airmen, the course they were following would not bring them to the field where they were supposed to land. While flying at 3,800 feet, the plane collided with Mount Waternaby, barreling through the snow and trees along the way. By the time the aircraft came to a full stop, it had lost a wing and its body was split open. An engine fire broke out and eventually reached the bombs on board, resulting in numerous explosions that were overheard by nearby residents. Miraculously, 5 of the 7 men survived the wreck. Locals immediately began a search and rescue mission. They spent hours trudging through the snow before they found their survivors, who were seriously injured. The men were transported down the mountain on toboggans. Given its remote location and challenging terrain, the wreck was left at the site where it remains today along an unofficial hiking trail tucked into a part of the wilderness that relatively few people venture into.
The Mulberry Harbor. Following the Dieppe raid in August 1942, strategists concluded that securing an existing operational port on the Normandy coast would be difficult. As a result, the Allies integrated the prefabrication of 2 floating harbors into their D-Day planning and preparations. One was for the American landings off Saint-Laurent, and the other to support the British and Canadian landings at Arromanches. The German High Command was skeptical of an attack on the Norway shore, due in part to their understanding of the lack of shelter. The ability of the Allied strategy to disregard the necessity of capturing a functioning harbor gave them much more room to maneuver in planning. The design concept had several origins. Mulberry was merely the next available codename in a vast list of potential codenames. During the Great War, while Winston Churchill was first Sea Lord in 1917, there was a proposal to seize two tiny islands off the Dutch coast and employ flat-bottom ships combined with built caissons to build an artificial port. Events moved rapidly and the concept was dropped, but no doubt it was kept in mind for a future need. German invasion of Poland. German soldiers burst past border barriers and moved fast on Warsaw, Poland's capital. Hundreds of thousands of refugees, both Jewish and non-Jewish, fled the German advance in the hope that the Polish army would prevent it. However, after a month of intense bombardment and bombing, Warsaw succumbed to the Germans. Most of eastern Poland was captured by Soviet forces rather quickly, while western Poland remained under German control until 1945. On September 3, 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany, citing their guarantee of Poland's border. Following Poland's surrender, German authorities began imposing their racial policies on the conquered regions. They ordered Jews to wear white armbands with a blue Star of David to identify themselves, and enlisted them for forced labor. They drove hundreds of thousands of Poles from their homes and replaced them with almost 500,000 ethnic Germans. The Holocaust. The history of the Holocaust is inextricably linked to the history of World War II. The conflict began on September 1, 1939, with the German invasion of Poland, and ended on May 8, 1945, with Germany's surrender. In September 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union conquered and partitioned Poland. Of the 3.3 million Polish Jews, about 2 million were under German authority, while the remaining 1.3 million were under Soviet administration. In German-occupied Poland, Jews were confined to ghettos where they frequently perished of famine, disease, and abuse. Hundreds of ghettos were formed throughout Central and Eastern Europe, and they facilitated the transfer of Jews to concentration camps. Nazi Germany built around 20,000 camps and subcamps between 1933 and 1945 to house enemies of the state. Death, sickness, malnutrition, overcrowding, torture, and unclean conditions were all common occurrences in the camps. In 1941, mobile killing units, Einsatzgruppen, killed 1.3 million Jews in Eastern Europe. Due to the inefficiency of this strategy, the Nazi authorities decided to build gas chambers. On January 20, 1942, Nazi officials agreed on the final solution to the Jewish question at the Wannsee Conference. The annihilation of a group of people became official government policy. To carry it out, the Nazis established 6 extermination camps in occupied Poland: Auschwitz, Belzec, Chelmno, Majdanek, Sobibor, and Treblinka. 2.5 million people were murdered in gas chambers after being brought in cattle trains from all across Europe. In ghettos, concentration camps, and death camps, the Jews battled the Nazis and their collaborators in order to protect their identities, humanity, and lives. Between July 1944 and May 1945, the Allied forces freed the camps as they moved across seized territory. 6 million Jews were massacred in all. They made up 2/3 of the Jewish population in Europe. The Battle of Britain. Following the Nazis' victorious capture of France on June 18, 1940, newly elected Prime Minister Winston Churchill delivered a speech declaring, "The Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin." The German tactic was intended to secure air supremacy over the United Kingdom as a prelude to Operation Sea Lion, a full-scale invasion of the United Kingdom. The Luftwaffe began attacking maritime centers on the south coast on July 10, 1940, before shifting its aim to RAF airfields and infrastructure. Over the next 12 weeks, both sides carried out terror bombings on civilian populations, causing significant damage in London and Berlin. Despite the fact that the Luftwaffe outnumbered the RAF, the British defensive systems were more advanced, and the British use of radar detection was critical to their effective opposition. Historians generally think that the Battle of Britain was mostly psychological in nature. As the war's first defeat of Hitler's armed forces, it was critical in raising the morale of both the British public and the soldiers. In 2010, one veteran RAF pilot, Tony Iverson, told the BBC, "As far as we were concerned, we saved the world." Churchill saw the RAF's contribution to the war effort as critical, remarking famously, "Never in the arena of human strife was so much due by so many to so few." The delay of Hitler's invasion plans also ensured that Britain could become a bastion for Allied forces as the war progressed, eventually becoming the basis from which the liberation of Western Europe was launched in 1944. More than 500 men were killed during the Battle of Britain, and over 800 more perished before the war ended in 1945. Fewer than 10 war veterans are believed to be living today. The Battle of the Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic was a fight for control of the Atlantic Ocean between Allied and German troops. The Allies needed to maintain essential supplies and soldiers moving between North America and Europe, where they might be used in the conflict, while the Germans intended to sever these supply lines. To do this, German U-boats and other warships patrolled the Atlantic Ocean, destroying Allied cargo ships. The Battle of the Atlantic brought the conflict to Canada's doorstep, with U-boats torpedoing ships as far east as the St. Lawrence River. The Royal Canadian Navy, RCN, the Royal Canadian Air Force, RCAF, and Canada's Merchant Navy all played important roles in the Allied effort. Because Allied convoys, groups of ships that crossed the Atlantic together under the cover of naval escorts, were routinely departing important ports like Halifax and Sydney, Nova Scotia, and St. John's, Newfoundland throughout the war, East Coast towns were quickly drawn into the battle. The Germans raised the number of U-boats from 30 to 300 between 1939 and 1942. They also devised efficient hunting strategies, such as attacking convoys with groups of submarines known as wolf packs. Their efforts initially paid off, with German U-boat raids claiming 454,000 tons of cargo in June 1941 alone. Between January and July 1942, approximately 400 Allied ships were sunk, while just 7 U-boats were lost. Germans invented torpedoes that were attracted to the noise by a ship's propellers. Allied scientists responded by designing a device that trailed behind a ship to redirect them. The Germans also developed technology that allowed U-boats to run diesel engines while underwater, as well as onboard radar, which boosted the capabilities of their submarines. Eventually, the Allies' better weaponry and tactics helped tip the conflict in their favor, with the U-boat fleet sustaining catastrophic casualties in the closing stages of World War II. During World War II, about 1,600 merchant navy members from Canada and Newfoundland were killed or injured. The RCN and RCAF also paid a severe price in the Battle of the Atlantic. On October 14, 1942, the ferry SS Caribou was destroyed, killing 136 passengers. The conflict claimed the lives of the majority of the 2,000 RCN officers and soldiers who died throughout the war. Blitzkrieg. By relying on the military technique of Blitzkrieg, Germany soon overran much of Europe and remained triumphant for more than 2 years. Blitzkrieg tactics demanded offensive weaponry, such as tanks, aircraft, and artillery, to be focused over a narrow front. These troops would cause a hole in enemy defenses, allowing armored tank divisions to quickly enter and wander freely behind enemy lines, generating shock and disarray among opposing defenses. German air support hindered the enemy from fully resupplying or redeploying soldiers, preventing reinforcements from being sent to seal breaches in the front. In turn, German forces would encircle opposing soldiers and force them to surrender. Due to the English Channel and the Royal Navy's defense against German ground assault, Germany was unable to overpower Great Britain. Despite the ongoing conflict with the United Kingdom, German soldiers invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941. Initially, the German Blitzkrieg appeared to be a success. With devastating casualties, Soviet forces were forced back more than 373 miles to the gates of Moscow. Hitler declared war on the United States in December 1941, adding great economic and military force to the coalition stacked against him. In 1942, a second German attack against the Soviet Union carried German soldiers east to the Volga River and the city of Stalingrad. Ultimately, in November 1942, the Soviet Union mounted a counter-offensive, trapping and defeating an entire German army at Stalingrad. But Germany was unable to defeat the Soviet Union, which, along with the United Kingdom and the United States, took the initiative from Germany. Germany became entangled in a long war, ultimately leading to its defeat in May 1945. Dunkirk evacuations. The evacuation, known as the Dunkirk Miracle, provided a significant boost to British morale. But when Nazi aspirations shifted toward Britain, Prime Minister Winston Churchill recognized that the greatest struggle remained ahead. The evacuation was overseen by Admiral Bertram Ramsay. Ramsay had retired prior to the war, but was called back in 1939. He and his team worked in a room deep inside the Dover Cliffs that formerly housed a dynamo, a sort of electrical generator that gave the operation its name, Operation Dynamo. Dynamo began on May 26, 1940. Strong defenses were built around Dunkirk, and the Royal Air Force dispatched all of its aircraft to cover the evacuation. More than 800 military ships of different sizes and forms were used to move troops across the English Channel. On June 3, 1940, the remaining British troops were evacuated, with French forces covering their withdrawal. Large warships could only pick up soldiers from the town's East Mole, a sea wall that extended into deep water, or send their boats on the beaches to collect them. To expedite the procedure, the British Admiralty sought assistance from small boat owners. These were dubbed little ships. Churchill and his staff estimated just 20 to 30,000 men would be evacuated from Dunkirk, but altogether, 338,000 troops were rescued, with one-third of them being French. 90,000 people remained to be taken prisoner, and the BEF left the majority of its tanks and heavy artillery behind. On June 4th at 9:30 a.m., all resistance in Dunkirk came to an end. 9. Uzi. Shortly after Israel became a country in the late 1940s, gun designer Major Uziel Gal created the Uzi family of submachine guns. Uzi are best known for their compactness and for being easy to load, while also having a reasonable degree of stability and accuracy. There are numerous variants of the gun, with the standard version measuring just over 2 feet, with its folding stock fully extended and its barrel measuring just 10 inches long. At around 9 pounds, when fully loaded with 9mm ammunition, it's also relatively light. Miniature variants of the Uzi are even smaller, measuring as little as 18 inches with a 7.8-inch barrel. Uzis were issued to Israeli Defense Forces IDF starting in 1954 and became available outside the military starting 2 years later. While the Uzi was useful for clearing compact spaces like bunkers, it was less accurate than many of the long-range small arms the IDF could expect to encounter among an enemy force. This is ultimately what led to its retirement from service in 2003. Since its debut, the Uzi has been exported to over 90 countries. Between the 1960s and the 80s, it was purchased by more military, law enforcement, and security markets than any other submachine gun. 8. Desert Eagle. Manufactured by Minnesota-based Magnum Research Inc. (MRI), the Desert Eagle is a large, bulky, semi-automatic handgun. Since the weapon weighs 4.5 pounds, it's not known for being convenient to carry or conceal. In other words, it's not the type of gun that someone typically carries for self-defense or any other practical purpose, but one that's often used for recreational target shooting. Given its size and capabilities, the Desert Eagle also has a reputation for being difficult to master. Unlike most other semi-automatic pistols, it uses a gas-operated ejection and chambering mechanism, which is typically seen in rifles. This enables the gun to use more powerful cartridges than traditional pistols, and brings its competitive ability up to par with Magnum revolvers. It also makes the Desert Eagle a great alternative for people who dislike the powerful recoil that usually comes with high-caliber handguns. Desert Eagles are available in .44 Magnum, .357 Magnum, .41 Magnum, and more. However, it's the .50 Action Express that's considered by many to be the world's most powerful handgun. To give you an idea of its strength, .50 caliber is the largest legally allowed caliber for a handgun in the US. It can easily penetrate through walls and, in many cases, through body armor. The Desert Eagle is a pop culture favorite, having appeared in over 600 movies, TV shows, and video games since it was first produced in the early 1980s. It's been featured in hit films including The Matrix, Red Heat, Assassins, and Austin Powers. 7. Maxim gun. The first ever fully automatic machine gun was designed in 1884 by an American-British inventor named Hiram Stevens Maxim. Known as the Maxim gun, it was equipped with one of history's earliest recoil-operated firing systems. It was equipped with a water cooling system, which made it heavy and more complex than some rapid-fire guns. However, it made up for its weight with its ability to shoot 600 rounds per minute, and to maintain its rate of fire far longer than conventional weapons of the time. It was possible for one person to operate the Maxim gun, but it realistically required more multitasking than one person was capable of, especially in combat. Typically, the weapon was operated by a team of 4 to 6 men. Moving the gun, which was much bulkier and larger than modern machine guns, required multiple people as well. Historian Martin Gilbert described the Maxim gun as the weapon most associated with imperial conquest. It was heavily used by colonial powers during the Scramble for Africa period, when various Western European nations imposed their rule over the continent. Imperial powers were known to lure their less armed African opponents into open spaces before firing at them, giving them essentially no chance to defend themselves. Modern experts speculate that the Maxim gun also imposed psychological effects on its targets. The Maxim gun initially failed to gain popularity among militaries, who at the time were hesitant to adopt the use of a machine gun due to their tendency to jam. Military officials were also concerned about the large cloud of smoke that was produced when the gun was fired, which stood to give away the shooter's position. However, this changed with the invention of smokeless powder, and it eventually became apparent that the Maxim was far more reliable than other machine guns. The British Army, US Army, Imperial Russian Army, and several other armed forces adopted the weapon, but it saw extremely limited use in combat. By the time World War I rolled around, the Maxim gun was mostly obsolete as better machine guns were developed. 6. M2 Browning. Designed toward the end of World War I by American firearm developer John Browning, the M2 Browning is a heavy machine gun that's been in use since the early 1930s. At 83 pounds, this bell-fed beast is not the type of gun that someone can just pick up and use. It's typically mounted on military vehicles including ships and tanks, and is capable of firing hundreds of .50 caliber rounds per minute at a maximum range of just over 4 miles. In addition to its power, the M2 Browning has an impressively long effective firing range of 2,000 yards. For this reason, it's been used in many instances as a sniper rifle. The legendary Marine Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock made history with the weapon during the Vietnam War in 1967, when he achieved a confirmed kill at 2,460 yards. The M2 has been used extensively in combat, including in World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Falklands War, the Soviet-Afghan War, the Gulf War, the Iraq War, and the war in Afghanistan. It's the second longest used firearm by the US military, and is a popular choice among armed forces in dozens of other countries. 5. M107 Sniper Rifle. The American-made M107 is the standardized military version of the Barrett M82 semi-automatic anti-material sniper rifle, also known as the Light 50 for its caliber and the Long-Range Sniper Rifle (LRSR). It's popular among the US Army and various other militaries. The M107 is utilized by the Australian Army, the German Army, the Indian Special Forces, and the Israeli Defense Forces Combat Engineering Corps. With a maximum range of 4,400 yards and a maximum effective range of 2,000 yards, the M107 enables snipers to shoot targets from extremely far away. As a .50 caliber weapon, it's also extremely powerful. This makes it appealing not only to militaries and certain law enforcement agencies, but to criminal organizations as well. During the 1980s, the Irish Republican Army smuggled shipments of the M82 version of the gun into Ireland. Between 1992 and 1997, they used the Light 50 to kill 5 soldiers and a police constable. The organization favored the gun despite the tendency for its members to shoot from just a fraction of the distance it's capable of. The M107 is also reportedly popular among Mexican drug cartels. In 2021, Mexican government sued Barrett and 9 other American gun manufacturers for $10 billion, accusing the companies of knowingly engaging in business practices that encourage illegal gun smuggling. The suit alleges that the manufacturer's recklessness has led to thousands of deaths at the hands of cartels. As it turns out, there may be some merit to this argument. Romain Lecour-Grand-Maison, a public safety and organized crime expert who specializes in Mexico and Central America, told Reuters that the M82 has shifted the power balance between criminals and poorly equipped police forces. There are of course some disadvantages to the M107 and the M82. These weapons are less accurate than many other long-range anti-personnel sniper rifles. Ammunition is also extremely expensive, costing between $4 and $5 per round. Do you believe that civilians should be allowed to own any gun they want? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. 4. Smith & Wesson 500. Since its release in 2003, the American-made Smith & Wesson Model 500 has been famously known as one of the world's most powerful revolvers. It contains a .50 caliber cartridge capable of firing a bullet with a half-inch diameter at 1,975 feet per second, generating a maximum pressure of 60,000 pounds per square inch, more than twice that of the Desert Eagle. This big, bulky revolver weighs around 3.5 pounds and comes with various barrel sizes, ranging from 3.5 to 10 inches. Given its size and powerful recoil, the Model 500 isn't the most user-friendly gun, and it's even been known to hurt people's hands. However, it's specially designed to reduce the recoil as much as possible, and is equipped with a compensator, which redistributes some of the propellant gases in order to make the kickback less harsh. The Model 500 is capable of killing large game at a range of over 200 yards, making it an ideal hunting gun that's better suited for the task than most handguns. 3. McMillan TAC-50. The McMillan TAC-50 is a .50 caliber long-range anti-material rifle equipped for taking out military equipment and structures like engines and unarmored vehicles. Produced by the Phoenix-based McMillan Firearms Manufacturing Company, this weapon was designed specifically for military and law enforcement use. It's been the Canadian Army's standard long-range sniper weapon LRSW since 2000 and has also been used by the French, Israeli, and Ukrainian militaries. 3 of the top 5 longest ever recorded kills were made by Canadian snipers using the McMillan TAC-50. Since 2017, the gun has held the record for the longest confirmed sniper kill, which was accomplished by an unnamed Canadian sniper in Iraq, who killed an ISIS fighter from 3,870 yards away, a distance equivalent to roughly 2.2 miles. The snipers who set these records took numerous factors into account in order to achieve their kills, including wind speed and direction, the Earth's curvature, and even their heartbeat. 2. Thompson machine gun. The Thompson machine gun was invented by United States Army Brigadier General John T. Thompson toward the end of World War I in 1918, but it wasn't completed until the conflict was over. The gun was famously nicknamed the Tommy gun, the Chicago typewriter, and the trench sweeper, and it was the first weapon to be marketed as a submachine gun. Thompson's vision was to develop a fully automatic rifle that would replace the bolt-action rifles that were in service for the US military at the time. He meant for it to be used in trench warfare, but after the war ended, it was also marketed for civilian use. However, the .45 caliber weapon initially failed to sell due to its high price tag of $200. It may not seem too expensive today, but in 1921, $200 was the equivalent of $3,038 in 2021. The Tommy gun nevertheless became a favorite among both militaries and civilians, rising in popularity throughout the 1920s and eventually becoming one of the most popular weapons of its kind, especially in the US. In its early days, small numbers of the gun were purchased by the Postal Inspection Service, which were experiencing a problem with robberies at the time. The Marine Corps also used the Thompson gun, and it was a favorite among Chinese warlords as well. To give you an idea of the weapon's power, it gave a 4-man team as much firepower as a 9-person rifle squad. Its capabilities made it a hit on both sides of the law, from police and legally armed civilians to organized criminals, including Depression-era gangsters who made a fortune selling bootleg liquor during Prohibition. The Tommy gun became even more popular during World War II as a favored weapon among Allied troops for its high rate of fire and its close combat capabilities.
It was used in several subsequent conflicts, but was eventually phased out by most militaries in favor of different weapons. Even though the original Thompson gun variants are no longer produced, the manufacturer, Auto Ordnance, makes several modern semi-automatic civilian weapons that are similar in appearance but are modified to comply with American gun laws. 1. Smith & Wesson Model 460. With a chamber pressure of 65,000 pounds per square inch, the Smith & Wesson Model 460 is one of the world's most powerful revolver cartridges. When it was first produced in 2005, the 460 XVR Extreme Velocity revolver variant was rumored to be the most powerful .45 caliber handgun on Earth. With a maximum velocity of 2,300 feet per second, this impressive pistol also boasts one of the highest muzzle velocities of any production revolver on the planet. Like the 500 Magnum, the 460 Magnum was built on the X-frame, Smith & Wesson's strongest and largest frame. Measuring 15 inches long with an 8.4-inch barrel, it was originally designed for use in Africa and Alaska as a hunting gun and for defense against dangerous game. Weighing 4.5 pounds, the Model 460 is heavy and therefore not the easiest gun to handle. It also requires meticulous care and cleaning in order to maintain its accuracy. When experienced shooter Richard Douglas gave his review of the gun in an interview with the National Interest, he explained how its accuracy slips fast if he forgets to clean it even once after shooting. His verdict on the gun was that it's cool, like the muscle car of revolvers, but he prefers to own and use a more practical weapon. Which of these guns do you think deserves to be known as the most powerful gun in the world? Let us know in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time. Bye!